This photograph, missed from 1952, is the occasion of the golden wedding of the Reverend and Mrs. Bowen, former minister of Blackfield Church. Standing at the back, from the left, George Williams, Charlie Shelley, Bert Tubbs, Jack Richards, Auntie Flo, and right at the back, Charles Burley and his wife Gladys, and in front of them, Mr. and Mrs. Townsend from Long Lane, Holbury, and Howard Rogers, the nephew of Mrs. Bowen. And seated at the front, Mr. Jimmy Stevens, who would then have been aged 93, Mrs. M. Shelley, and Mr. and Mrs. George Musselwhite. At the back, Reverend and Mrs. Fraser, the present minister of that church, Uncle Jim Williams, Uncle George Dyer, and in the next row, Audrey's mum, Mrs. Baker, Bob's mum, Mrs. Rees, Beryl Venyard, who married David Bowen, grandson of Mr. and Mrs. Bowen, Mrs. Sullivan, Auntie Evie, and Nell Shelley, formerly Musselwhite, and the lady behind her is her sister, Mrs. Emmy Wadhams. In this section, at the front, left to right, Reverend Wassell, a brother of Mrs. Bowen, and her three sisters, Mrs. Rogers, Miss Wassell, and Mrs. Bentley, who lived opposite us in Ashdown Road. The row behind, Great Granny Tillier, Mrs. Floss Lowe, Mrs. Glad Musselwhite, Mrs. Donnellan, and Mrs. Hilda Richards, formerly Bedford. At the back, we have, on the left, Miss Bertha Musselwhite, Frank Tillier, a nephew of Mr. Anthony Tillier, Auntie Lily. The man almost hidden is probably Nell Shelley's husband, Jack, Mrs. Mary Mutimer, and her husband, Mr. Arthur Mutimer, partly obscuring Mrs. Ada Shelley, and Mr. Arthur Lowe is in the top right-hand corner.